Matthew Croft, welcome back to Detroit.
Thank you.
So I guess you grew up in Waterford.
I did.
You end up going to Wayne State where you studied composition and conducting, and then you've gone off to make your fame doing all kinds of tours. You're doing right now, Mamma Mia was the 25th anniversary.
Yep.
You're doing that tour right now. But you're also here because you're orchestrating a new musical by a local composer, Dave Fazzini, and Mitch Carter, who did the libretto. Can you tell us, first of all, how did you end up working on Alyce?
Well, I was a student of Dave's at Notre Dame Prep out in Pontiac. He was our choir director, and he knew I had an interest in composition and arranging, and encouraged me to do that for our school masses and things like that. And we just stayed in touch from that. And he called me one day asking for some thoughts about the show, and he's like, "Well, I don't suppose you'd be interested in doing this, would you?" And here we are.
And here you are. So I guess as music director for all these shows, I know you've done Jesus Christ Superstar and Guys and Dolls and so many. We could probably be sitting here all afternoon naming all the shows you've done. Is there a natural fit if you're doing music directing for these shows to be able to orchestrate? I guess you're probably hearing all kinds of orchestration played out.
Yeah, you learn a lot from learning what works, what you don't think works, because shows are written fast, especially shows like written on a Broadway timetable are written fast, and sometimes things work great, sometimes they don't. So doing as many shows as I has been a real interesting learning experience to be able to pick apart, the greats of the business and listen to what they do and why they do what they do. And then just from the music direction side, a lot of lessons I think I've learned from materials that don't work or aren't user friendly. That's something that's really important. Like the show that they're writing is fascinating and interesting and beautiful. So I want to make sure when we hand it to the orchestra for the first time, they're not going to spend the whole rehearsal complaining or being like, "What is this? I don't understand what you want." Because I've been there, I've done that. Nobody needs that, and that's a waste of time, a waste of money, and it's just something as a music director you learn how to avoid.
Well, I listened earlier to Plague of 43 that you orchestrated. It's like water. It was so easy. I love the way it kind of started and it just built to this great swell at the fantastic end. So when you're working with a composer, like in this case Dave Fazzini, does he tell you like I want this piece to sound like this, or is this something you come up with as you're playing with what he's played at the piano?
So usually I've asked if he's got any ideas or any specific references or sounds or things. They'll provide me with like a piano chart, piano vocal, and then any sort of ideas of like, oh, I like this idea from this song or the sound, or I want dramatically this is what's happening in the song. And then it's just kind of up to me to sit at the computer or at the piano and just kind of figure out what's the best way to get the song from A to B to C. I really focus on the lyrics in a lot of it too, because the lyrics are going to inform what are we talking about, what's the subtext of the characters. And so taking their input in, I just kind of trial and error. I sit and play around with something until I think I've got the idea, and then I just make sure it sounds good.
I understand that you decided that you wanted 50. This orchestra was going to be a 15-person orchestra. How did you decide that, and what goes into deciding? Okay, how many you're going to have, depending on what the story or the feel?
Yeah, the polite answer is it comes down to a lot of like artistic factors. There's also budget.
Sure.
And that's the honest answer is how much money do we have and how many people can we get. But I think there's something to be said, especially for those kind of music that they've written. It's not pop rock. It's not something where we need a rhythm section. So we need to live in an orchestral world, but an orchestral world that has the ability to do unusual things and colors, because this is a show with magic and folk elements and fairy tale elements. So I kind of just wanted to pull together an ensemble that could touch all the bases that we need. So we have 5 string players. We have 3 woodwinds, so I've got high, middle, and low that I can play around with as needed. Same with the brass. We've got trumpet, trombone, and horn. And then our rhythm section, which is 2 keyboards, one of who's playing guitar and mandolin as well, percussionist and harp. And that allows me to do a lot of those really interesting colors and unusual textures that can kind of play into that world along with the richness of an orchestra around it.
So Alyce has a supernatural element to this piece, and so I'm wondering, does that influence like what instruments you'll be using? Maybe if there's like motifs to identify each character, or maybe you can talk about that.
Yeah, it does. Both of our keyboards we're using software called Apple Mainstage to play with them, so that we can use samples and unusual electronic, like altered sounds in them. And so there's certain things that I'm playing around with of like, a way to take something like a celeste or a music box or even just a normal piano, but to kind of put some spin on it that makes it sound not quite human, not quite natural, which doesn't pull us out of this orchestral world, but it gives enough of an edge, a feeling of like that's not a normal sound. Something magical must be happening.
When you're sitting down to sort of orchestrate a particular piece, is everything on the page, on the piano, from the piano score, what you're using? Are you ever adding anything that's not there? Or you're like co-composing? And how does that work? And does that step on the toes of the composers? I didn't put that in there. How does that work?
I mean, Dave and Mitch have been wonderful in letting me have some freedom to come up with. It really depends on the composer if they like they send you something and say, if you've got ideas or counter melodies or things, go for it. There are some composers who are like, just make it sound exactly like I wrote, and you really don't have that freedom, and here we do. So it's nice to be able to play around and say, they've written something in the piano part, then we find a way to put that into an orchestra and make it work, but then it needs something extra to kind of elevate between a phrase or to counterbalance something, and there is a little bit of freedom to write something or to like take a idea and interpolate it or play with intervals or things like that, to where it's still based on, everything's based on what they've written. So, but it just allows an orchestrator some freedom to tell the story.
Oh, wonderful. There was a composer in town, Ricky Ian Gordon, who he was in Detroit working on a project. He says, I only write between the hours of 7 a.m. and 9 a.m. I'm wondering, do you have anything like that? Do you only start orchestrating or working on a particular piece at certain hours? No?
It's all hours of the day. I mean, boy, what time is it now? I was up till probably around 3 a.m. working on stuff last night. I do tend to be a night owl, so it tends to be a lot of writing is done late at night. But it's usually, if I have an idea, I like to grab my laptop or something and just scribble it down so that I can remember and go back and hit it again later. Because especially touring where we have rehearsals and shows, I just have to take the time where we have it to get through everything that needs to get done.
I have a question about that. So I believe you live in Omaha, right?
Yes.
You have a family, I think, wife?
Yes.
And so you're traveling a lot of weeks. How does that, what is that? Tell us about that, some of the challenges of being away like every week.
It's not easy, and it's one of those things, especially where if there's some sort of like big event happening back home, or some sort of like a problem with our house or an illness or something, like it's hard to get back because the show always demands like you have to be here, you have to do it, you have to make sure you're covered before you can go anywhere. So it's difficult to get back for something like that. But I've been doing this what is 24 now? Yeah, I've been doing this for about 10 years now. So pretty much the whole time we've been together. So my wife and she's also an award-winning director and choreographer and actor. So she understands. We've worked out how to be communicative and work together and make it happen. And that is really great. I don't think this would be nearly as successful if we hadn't figured that out. But yeah, I do wish I got home more. I miss being home.
Fantastic.
And my animals. I miss the animals too.
So 25 years of Mamma Mia on the road, on tour. Is that show like exactly written out? Do you have any flexibility when you're sitting in the pit as the music director, or has it been exactly as it was 25 years ago?
Well, that's a funny question, and I'm going to get in trouble for telling this story from a music supervisor if he ever sees it. So David Holzenberg is a music supervisor. He was the original music director on Broadway back in 2001. He's been with the show since then, and he's in charge basically of all companies worldwide. And phenomenal. He's Broadway royalty. Like, he's done so many shows. But his note to me when we started this was they sent somebody to Sweden to transcribe the notes. So 90% of what we sing and play is direct from the master tapes from ABBA. But there are also moments where he says, you have taste, play with taste. So I have a little freedom in spots, and I know where those spots are, and my associate conductor, when he conducts, I've told him, this is where we have those spots. You can improv a little. You don't have to play what's on the page. But other spots in the show, we try to stick as close as we possibly can, because the audience wants to hear ABBA done ABBA,
As they know.
They're not coming to hear Matt Croft interpolate ABBA.
I love it. Actually makes me ask you another question now, going back to Alyce. So do you have a certain specific style that you use when you're orchestrating, or does it just depend on what the piece is? You just go with wherever the piece is going, and whatever comes out, or whatever you're feeling at that moment, that's what's happening?
The way I look at it, there's a language for the show. The show kind of lives in like this, like, it's modern classical music in the way that it's written. It's not, because again, we're not going for like pop rock. We're not going for, like, this isn't, I wouldn't say this is like your contemporary musical theater that you're going to go see at like a cabaret in New York. So the orchestral language has to be the same. So it's based a little more in the classical world in terms of the way it's written, the way I'm thinking about voicings and harmonies, and the way I'm thinking about instrument choice.
So tell us, is this the first time you've orchestrated for a brand new musical?
It's the first one that's actually come to fruition to be performed. I did my first show, what was it, 2003? I was a freshman. We did Fiddler on the Roof, and I played percussion on that. That was the first show I ever played. And I remember Joe Martin, our old band director at Notre Dame, was kind enough my senior year to let me conduct part of one of the performances of Fellow Dolly. And that summer I had done my first professional show, which was Hair, of all things. I was 16 years old.
Doing Hair.
And I did an Actors Equity production of Hair. Just, it was I had a friend who needed a rehearsal pianist for a day, and she's like, "Can you just cover this?" And they liked me so much they asked me to stay on the show.
Wow.
And so here I am, a little 16-year-old kid waving my hands at, one of the most important political and rock musicals of all time. And they're doing, this is everybody else in the company was 22, 23. So they're doing the drug use, the simulated drug use. They're doing the nudity. They're doing everything in that show that it calls for. And so my parents had to sign waivers for me to be allowed to do it because we were on stage, so I saw everything. And they were like, yes, my 16-year-old can be around naked people simulating drug use. It's fine.
Oh my